Hey, my name's Dean, and up until a few months ago, I thought I had a pretty solid marriage. I mean, Avery and I had been together for almost 12 years, and we had two great kids, Emma and Lucas. Life was good, or so I thought. Things started feeling off around last summer. Avery had always been pretty involved with our home garden, and she'd hired this new gardener, Gavin, to help out. Gavin was a charming guy, a bit younger than us, with that kind of easygoing personality that makes people like him instantly. He seemed harmless enough, and honestly, he did a great job with the garden. Avery raved about his work all the time. But then there were these little things that started to bug me. Avery was spending a lot more time outside, even when she didn't need to be. She'd come in late, all flustered and sweaty, claiming she was just helping Gavin out or learning some new gardening tricks. At first, I brushed it off. She'd always been passionate about our garden, so it didn't seem like a big deal. Then she started being secretive with her phone. She'd giggle at texts and quickly put her phone away when I walked into the room. I told myself I was just being paranoid. After all, we had two kids and a busy life. Why would she risk that? But the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. One evening, I decided to confront her about it. She got defensive, saying I was being ridiculous and that she was just excited about the garden. "Dean, you're imagining things. Gavin's just a gardener," she said, rolling her eyes. I wanted to believe her, but something about her tone felt off. Still, I let it go, hoping I was wrong. Over the next few weeks, the strange behavior continued. Avery started dressing up more, even for just hanging out in the garden. She'd wear makeup in these cute little outfits that she never bothered with before. I told myself she just wanted to look good. Who doesn't want to feel attractive? But deep down, the doubt was eating away at me. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a warm Friday evening, and I'd come home early from work. The kids were at a sleepover, so the house was unusually quiet. I walked into the living room and noticed the back door was slightly ajar. Curious, I headed out to the garden. I wish I hadn't. There they were, Avery and Gavin, in a tight embrace, kissing like teenagers who couldn't keep their hands off each other. My heart sank. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. They didn't see me at first, too wrapped up in each other. When they finally did, Avery pushed Gavin away and tried to play it off as some sort of misunderstanding. "Dean, it's not what it looks like," she stammered. But her flushed face and the way she clung to Gavin told me everything I needed to know. I couldn't believe it. My wife was having an affair with the gardener. I turned and walked back inside, my mind reeling. How had I been so blind? And what the hell was I going to do now? I spent that night in a restless daze, replaying the scene of Avery and Gavin over and over in my mind. It was like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. How could she do this to us? To our family? The next morning, Avery acted as if nothing had happened, which made my blood boil even more. I couldn't stand the sight of her, but I needed more proof before I made any decisions. I decided to check her phone, something I had never done before. When she went to shower, I seized the opportunity. Her phone was unlocked, and I quickly navigated to her messages. My heart pounded as I scrolled through her conversation with Gavin. There were texts filled with flirtation, explicit messages, and even plans for their next rendezvous. I took screenshots of everything, sending them to my email. There was no way she could deny it now. When she came out of the shower, I was waiting for her in the living room, my hands shaking with a mix of rage and heartbreak. "We need to talk, Avery." She looked at me, a flicker of guilt crossing her face. "Dean, Her face went pale, and she sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "I'm so sorry, Dean. I didn't mean for it to go this far." I laughed bitterly. "Didn't mean for it to go this far? You've been cheating on me with our gardener, Avery. How could you do this to us? To our kids?" She looked up, tears streaming down her face. "It was a mistake. I was lonely, and he was there. It didn't mean anything, I swear." "Didn't mean anything?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You planned this. You lied to me every day. How am I supposed to believe you now?" She reached out to touch me, but I recoiled. "Please, Dean, we can go to counseling. We can fix this. I love you, and I love our family." I shook my head, feeling a tear slip down my own cheek. "I don't know if we can fix this, Avery. You've broken my trust. You've broken my heart." I grabbed my keys and left the house, needing to get away from her lies and deceit. I drove aimlessly, trying to clear my head, but the images of Avery and Gavin kept flashing in my mind. I thought about our kids, Emma and Lucas. How would this affect them? How could I explain this to them? After a few hours, I went back home. Avery was sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Dean, please," she begged. "Let's try to work this out, for the kids." I sat down across from her, exhausted and numb. "All right," I said finally. "We'll try counseling. But Avery, this isn't going to be easy. You've hurt me in ways I can't even describe." She nodded, wiping her tears. "I know, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it up to you." We sat there in silence, the weight of what had happened hanging heavily between us. I didn't know if our marriage could survive this, but for the sake of our kids, I was willing to try. The days following our confrontation were a blur. Avery and I moved through the house like strangers, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. We had agreed to try counseling, but the appointment wasn't for another week, and every day felt like an eternity. One evening, I came home from work to find Gavin in our kitchen. He was leaning against the counter talking to Avery in a low voice. My blood boiled at the sight of him in my home, but I forced myself to stay calm. "What the hell is he doing here?" I demanded, my voice shaking with barely controlled anger. Avery looked startled, and Gavin straightened up, his expression a mix of guilt and defiance. "Dean, I asked him to come. We need to talk." "Talk?" I scoffed, glaring at Gavin. "There's nothing to talk about. Get out of my house." Gavin looked at Avery, who nodded reluctantly. He walked past me, muttering an apology as he left. I slammed the door behind him and turned to Avery, my hands trembling with rage. "How could you bring him here?" I shouted. "After everything you've done, you still let him into our home?" Avery burst into tears, but I was too angry to care. "Dean, I just wanted to explain. I thought if we talked, maybe you could understand." "Understand?" I laughed bitterly. "What's there to understand, Avery? You cheated on me with the gardener. You've lied to me, betrayed me. How can you even think I could understand?" She sobbed harder, and for a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered the texts, the videos, and my resolve hardened. "You need to make a choice, Avery. It's him or me. You can't have both." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with desperation. "Dean, please. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose our family. I'll end it with Gavin, I promise." I wanted to believe her, but the trust was gone. "We'll see," I said coldly. "But if I find out you're still seeing him, we're done." Avery nodded, her tears falling silently. I walked away, needing space to think. I went to the backyard, the place where I had first discovered her betrayal. The garden, once a place of peace and beauty, now felt tainted. Over the next few days, Avery kept her promise. She avoided Gavin, deleted his number, and focused on trying to repair our relationship. We went to our first counseling session, and although it was difficult, it felt like a step in the right direction. But the anger and hurt were still there, just below the surface. Every time I looked at her, I saw her with Gavin. Every time she touched me, I wondered if she was thinking about him. It was a constant struggle, and I didn't know if I could ever get past it. One evening, about a month after the initial confrontation, Avery came to me with a proposal. "Dean, I've been thinking. Maybe we should move, start fresh somewhere new where we don't have these memories hanging over us." The idea caught me off guard. "Move? Where would we go?" "Anywhere," she said, her eyes pleading. "Just somewhere we can have a fresh start. For us. For the kids." I considered it, the thought of leaving everything behind both terrifying and tempting. "I'll think about it," I said finally. As I lay in bed that night, I realized that maybe a fresh start was exactly what we needed, but I also knew that no matter where we went, the pain of her betrayal would follow us. It was something we'd have to confront again and again until it either destroyed us or made us stronger. The days turned into weeks, and the weight of Avery's betrayal continued to hang over us like a dark cloud. The initial shock had worn off, but the pain was still fresh, and it seeped into every aspect of my life. I found myself snapping at the kids over the smallest things, avoiding conversations with friends, and losing focus at work. My world had been turned upside down, and I was struggling to find my footing. Our counseling sessions were a mixed bag. Some days, it felt like we were making progress, peeling back the layers of hurt and mistrust. Other days, it felt like we were just going through the motions, saying what we thought the counselor wanted to hear. Avery was trying, I could see that. She was more attentive, more present, but it felt like too little, too late. One night, after a particularly grueling session, I found myself alone in the living room, nursing a drink. The house was quiet, the kids already in bed, and Avery upstairs, probably crying herself to sleep. I couldn't bring myself to join her. I needed space to think, to breathe. I looked around the room at the family photos on the wall, the memories we had built together. Everything felt tainted now, overshadowed by her betrayal. I picked up a photo of our wedding day, a day that had once been the happiest of my life. Now it felt like a cruel joke. The emotions hit me like a tidal wave. Anger, sadness, betrayal. I felt like a fool for not seeing the signs, for trusting her so blindly. I wanted to scream, to break something, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything. Instead, I let the tears come, silent and unbidden. I hadn't cried since that night in the garden, but now, the dam had broken. The next day at work, I could barely concentrate. My colleagues noticed my distraction, but I brushed off their concerns, claiming it was just stress. In truth, I was hanging on by a thread. Every time my phone buzzed, I feared it was another message from Avery, another plea for forgiveness that I wasn't ready to give. My performance at work began to suffer. I missed deadlines, forgot important meetings, and my boss called me into his office more than once to ask if everything was okay. I lied, of course, saying it was just a rough patch, promising to get back on track. But the truth was, I didn't know how to. The emotional toll was immense. I felt like I was living in a fog, disconnected from everything and everyone around me. The joy I once found in my kids, in my work, in life itself, was gone, replaced by a constant ache in my chest. One evening, as I was tucking Emma and Lucas into bed, Emma looked up at me with her big, innocent eyes. "Daddy, why are you sad all the time?" Her question hit me like a punch to the gut. I forced a smile, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm just tired, sweetie. Daddy's had a lot on his mind." She seemed to accept my answer, but I could see the worry in her eyes. Lucas, too, had been quieter than usual, his normally cheerful demeanor dampened by the tension in the house. It broke my heart to see my children affected by this, to know that my inability to cope was impacting them. That night, after the kids were asleep, Avery came to me. She looked exhausted, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Dean, I know I've hurt you. I know things will never be the same, but I love you, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right." I looked at her, the woman I had loved for so many years, and felt a flicker of the old affection. But it was buried deep under layers of pain and mistrust. "Avery, I don't know if we can ever go back to what we were. You've broken something inside me, something that might never heal." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand. But I'm not giving up on us, Dean. I can't. I love you too much." Her words, sincere as they were, felt like a dagger in my heart. I wanted to believe her, to trust that we could rebuild what had been shattered, but I wasn't sure if I had the strength to try. As the weeks turned into months, the strain between Avery and me became a constant undercurrent in our lives. The kids sensed it, and despite our efforts to shield them from the worst of it, the tension was palpable. Emma and Lucas became more withdrawn, their laughter less frequent, and it tore me apart to see them affected by our turmoil. Avery continued to make an effort. She stopped seeing Gavin immediately after our confrontation and threw herself into therapy and counseling. She even suggested couples therapy, which we attended, albeit reluctantly on my part. Despite her efforts, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal and the lingering doubts that clouded my mind. One evening, after another difficult session with our therapist, I found myself alone in our bedroom, staring at the ceiling. Avery was downstairs, likely crying or journaling as she often did these days. I thought about everything that had happened, from the moment I first suspected something was wrong to the painful confrontation and the days that followed. I knew I had to make a decision. Living in this limbo was not only torturing me, but was also unfair to our children. They deserve better than a broken home filled with unspoken resentment and distrust. The next morning, I asked Avery to join me for a walk. We headed to the nearby park, a place we used to visit often with the kids. It was a beautiful sunny day, but the heaviness in my heart made it hard to appreciate the beauty around us. "Avery," I began, taking a deep breath, "we need to talk." She looked at me with apprehension, her eyes filled with worry. What is it, Dean? I've been thinking a lot about us, about everything that's happened, I said, choosing my words carefully. I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you for what you did. The trust is gone, and without it, our marriage feels like a shell of what it once was. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she remained silent, waiting for me to continue. I know you've been trying, and I appreciate that, I said. But I can't keep living like this. It's not fair to me, it's not fair to you, and it's definitely not fair to Emma and Lucas. Her voice trembled as she spoke. So, what are you saying, Dean? Are you giving up on us? I shook my head. I'm not giving up, Avery. I'm just acknowledging that some things can't be fixed. I think we need to separate, at least for a while. We both need time to heal and figure out what we want moving forward. She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. I don't want to lose you, Dean. I love you. I know I messed up, but please don't give up on us. My heart ached at her words, but I knew this was the right decision. Avery, I love you too, but love isn't enough to fix what's broken. We need time apart to figure out if there's any chance of rebuilding our relationship, or if we need to move on separately. We walked back to the house in silence, the weight of our decision heavy on our shoulders. Over the next few days, we made arrangements for the separation. Avery would stay with her sister for a while, and we agreed to share custody of the kids, making sure they knew this wasn't their fault and that we both loved them very much. The day she left was one of the hardest days of my life. Watching her pack her bags and say goodbye to the kids, knowing this was the end of an era, was almost too much to bear. But deep down, I knew it was the right thing to do. The house felt empty without her, but in that emptiness I found a strange sense of peace. I could breathe again, free from the constant reminder of her betrayal. I focused on the kids, on my work, and on healing myself. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the loneliness felt suffocating, but I held on to the hope that time would heal my wounds. Avery and I continued therapy separately, and after a few months, we began to see each other occasionally, discussing the kids and our progress. The initial separation brought some relief, but the anger I felt toward Avery and Gavin lingered. I needed an outlet for all the pent-up frustration, and the idea of revenge began to take root in my mind. I knew it wasn't the healthiest way to deal with my emotions, but the thought of making Gavin pay for what he had done to my family was too tempting to ignore. One evening, I found myself scrolling through Gavin's social media profiles. He was as smug and carefree as ever, posting pictures of his gardening projects and hanging out with friends. It made my blood boil. I couldn't stand the thought of him getting away with everything, living his life without any consequences. I decided to hit him where it would hurt the most, his reputation. Gavin had recently started his own gardening business, and I knew from Avery's gushing that he relied heavily on word-of-mouth recommendations and positive online reviews to get new clients. I created several fake accounts and began posting negative reviews about his business on every platform I could find. I painted him as unreliable, unprofessional, and even hinted at inappropriate behavior with female clients. The next step was more personal. I had a friend, Jake, who worked in IT security. I reached out to him explaining the situation and asking for his help. Jake was hesitant at first, warning me about the potential legal consequences, but he eventually agreed to help me hack into Gavin's email and social media accounts. We didn't do anything drastic, just enough to cause chaos and confusion in his personal and professional life. Within a week, Gavin's business started to crumble. Clients canceled appointments, and new inquiries dried up. He posted frantic messages on his social media, trying to do damage control, but it was too late. His reputation was tarnished, and there was little he could do to fix it. While watching Gavin's downfall provided a temporary sense of satisfaction, it did little to alleviate the deeper pain I felt. My nights were still filled with restless sleep and haunting memories. I realized that revenge, while sweet in the moment, couldn't heal the wounds Avery had inflicted. Avery and I continued to see our therapist separately, and slowly I began to shift my focus from revenge to healing. I started taking better care of myself, both physically and mentally. I picked up old hobbies that I had abandoned over the years, like hiking and playing the guitar. I even joined a support group for people who had gone through similar experiences, which helped more than I expected. One evening, a few months after our separation, Avery reached out to me. She wanted to talk, to see if there was any chance of reconciliation. I was hesitant, but I agreed to meet her at a nearby park where we could talk without the kids overhearing. She looked different, more fragile and remorseful. "Dean, I know I've hurt you in ways that can't be undone," she began, her voice trembling. "But I still love you, and I want to try to make things right. I'm willing to do whatever it takes." I looked at her, the woman who had been my partner for so many years, and felt a mixture of emotions. Anger, yes, but also a deep sadness and a faint glimmer of the love we once shared. "I don't know, Avery," I said honestly. "I've been working on healing myself, and I've come a long way. But the trust, it's still gone. I don't know if we can ever get that back." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand. I've been working on myself too, and I realize now how much I took our relationship for granted. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just a chance to prove that I can change." Rebuilding our lives was a slow and painful process. Avery and I were committed to trying, but the road ahead was anything but smooth. During this time, the support of friends and family became crucial. Their perspectives and encouragement were invaluable as I navigated the complexities of forgiveness and trust. One of my closest friends, Mark, had been there for me from the beginning. Mark and I had known each other since college, and he was like a brother to me. He was the first person I called after discovering Avery's affair, and his unwavering support helped keep me grounded. We met up for drinks one evening, and as I recounted the latest developments with Avery, Mark listened intently. "Dean, I gotta say, you're stronger than I am. I don't think I could ever try to work things out after something like this," he admitted, taking a sip of his beer. I sighed, feeling the weight of his words. "Honestly, Mark, I don't know if I'm strong or just desperate to keep my family together. Every day is a battle." He nodded sympathetically. "Just remember, man, it's okay to put yourself first. You've got to take care of yourself too." My sister Karen was another pillar of support. She lived a few hours away, but made a point to visit whenever she could. Karen had always been fiercely protective of me, and she wasn't shy about expressing her opinions on Avery's betrayal. My parents, though initially shocked by the news, provided a steady foundation. They had been married for over 40 years, and their relationship was something I had always aspired to. They offered advice, shared their experiences, and most importantly, reminded me that I wasn't alone. "Dad, how did you and Mom get through tough times?" I asked one evening, seeking wisdom from someone who had seen it all. He paused, considering his words. "Dean, marriage is about commitment and understanding. There were times when we wanted to give up, but we always remembered why we chose each other in the first place. If you can find that reason again, maybe there's hope." My mom, ever the peacemaker, added, "But it's also about knowing when to let go. If it's causing more pain than joy, sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away." Their advice, while sometimes conflicting, provided a balanced perspective. It reminded me that there was no right or wrong answer, only what was best for me and my family. As Avery and I continued our journey towards healing, I often found myself drifting into memories of our past. These flashbacks were bittersweet, a poignant reminder of what we once had, and the stark contrast to where we were now. One evening I sat on the porch, staring at the stars and letting my mind wander. I remembered the early days of our relationship, back when everything seemed perfect and uncomplicated. We met in college, both of us attending a mutual friend's party. Avery had been the life of the party, her laughter infectious and her smile captivating. I was immediately drawn to her, and we spent the entire evening talking and laughing. By the end of the night, I knew I wanted to see her again. Our first date was a simple picnic in the park. Avery had packed an elaborate spread, complete with homemade sandwiches, fresh fruit, and even a bottle of wine. We sat under a large oak tree, talking for hours about our dreams, our fears, and our plans for the future. It was one of the best days of my life. As our relationship progressed, we faced our fair share of challenges, but we always managed to work through them together. I remembered the time when I lost my job and how supportive Avery had been. She reassured me that we would get through it, and her unwavering faith in us gave me the strength to keep going. Our wedding day was another cherished memory. We exchanged vows under a beautiful arch of flowers, surrounded by family and friends. Avery looked stunning in her dress, and as I watched her walk down the aisle, I knew I was the luckiest man alive. We danced the night away, and I couldn't stop smiling, knowing I was starting a new chapter with the woman I loved. Then came the birth of our children, Emma and Lucas. The first time I held Emma in my arms, I was overwhelmed with love and responsibility. Avery and I were a team, navigating the challenges of parenthood together. Those sleepless nights and early morning feedings were hard, but they also brought us closer. But as I sat on the porch, I couldn't help but feel the sting of betrayal overshadowing these happy memories. The woman who had been my partner, my confidant, had shattered my trust. The Avery I remembered seemed like a different person from the one who had betrayed me. These flashbacks weren't just about the good times, though. They also reminded me of the small cracks that had appeared over the years. There were times when we drifted apart, caught up in the demands of work and parenting. We stopped communicating as openly, taking each other for granted. I couldn't ignore my own role in the deterioration of our relationship. One memory stood out, a night about a year ago when Avery had tried to talk to me about her feelings of loneliness. I had brushed her off, too tired and preoccupied with work to really listen. In hindsight, I realized that was a turning point. Perhaps if I had been more attentive, more present, things might have been different. As painful as it was to confront these memories, they also provided clarity. Our relationship had always been a mix of highs and lows, joy and pain. The affair was a devastating betrayal, but it was also a symptom of deeper issues that we both needed to address. The next day, during our counseling session, I shared some of these flashbacks with Avery. She listened, tears streaming down her face as I recounted both the good times and the moments when we had faltered. It was a difficult conversation, but it felt necessary. "I miss those days," Avery said softly. "I miss us." "I do too," I admitted. "But we can't go back. We can only try to move forward." Our therapist nodded. "These memories are important. They remind you of what you've built together and what's at stake. But they also highlight the areas where you need to grow and change. Healing is about acknowledging the past but focusing on the future." We left the session feeling a bit lighter, the weight of unspoken memories finally addressed. It wasn't a solution, but it was a step forward. We knew we had a long road ahead, but for the first time in a while I felt a glimmer of hope. As the emotional and mental strain from the affair and its aftermath continued, it wasn't long before the stress began to take a physical toll on me. I started noticing frequent headaches, a constant feeling of fatigue, and a general sense of being unwell. I tried to push through it, attributing my symptoms to the emotional turmoil I was experiencing, but it soon became clear that I needed to address these health concerns seriously. One morning, after waking up with a pounding headache and feeling unusually dizzy, I decided it was time to see a doctor. Avery insisted on coming with me, despite our strained relationship. She looked genuinely worried, and despite everything, I appreciated her concern. The doctor ran a series of tests and asked about my symptoms and lifestyle. After examining the results, he sat us down to discuss his findings. "Dean, it looks like you're dealing with high blood pressure and elevated stress levels. Your body is reacting to the prolonged stress, and it's important that we address this before it leads to more serious health issues." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and concern. It was a wake-up call that I couldn't ignore. "What do I need to do, doctor?" He outlined a plan that included medication to manage my blood pressure, a healthier diet, regular exercise, and stress management techniques. He also strongly recommended that I continue seeing a therapist to address the underlying emotional issues. Avery was supportive throughout the process, helping me implement the lifestyle changes the doctor suggested. She started cooking healthier meals, joined me on evening walks, and encouraged me to stick to the exercise routine. It was a strange but welcome shift in our dynamic, as we found ourselves working together towards a common goal. One evening, as we sat on the porch after a long walk, Avery turned to me with a look of determination. "Dean, I know things have been incredibly hard, but I'm committed to helping you through this. We've both made mistakes, but we need to focus on moving forward, for our health and for our kids." I appreciated her words, even if part of me still held on to the pain of her betrayal. "Thanks, Avery. I'm trying my best. It's just a lot to deal with." "I know," she said softly, "but we're in this together and we'll get through it." Throughout this time, I also reconnected with my kids in a deeper way. We spent more quality time together, doing activities that we all enjoyed. Whether it was playing board games, going for bike rides, or simply watching movies together, these moments became a source of joy and healing for me. One night, as I tucked Emma and Lucas into bed, Emma looked up at me with her big, curious eyes. "Daddy, are you feeling better now?" I smiled, feeling a warmth in my heart that had been absent for too long. "Yes, sweetheart, I am, and I'm going to keep getting better, I promise." As I left their room, I realized that despite the challenges, I was slowly finding my way back to a healthier, happier version of myself. The journey was far from over, but I felt more equipped to face whatever lay ahead. The pain of the affair would never fully disappear, but we learned to live with it and to grow from it. We made a conscious decision to focus on the future and the love we had for our children. 1 year later, update. Hey everyone, it's been a year since I last shared our story, and a lot has changed since then. I wanted to give you all an update on where we are now, as your support and advice have been incredibly helpful throughout this journey. After months of trying to rebuild our relationship, Avery and I came to a mutual decision. It was time to part ways. We realized that despite our best efforts, the trust and connection we once had couldn't be fully restored. It was a hard pill to swallow, but we both knew it was the right choice for us and for our kids. The divorce process was challenging, but we managed to keep things amicable for the sake of Emma and Lucas. We agreed on joint custody, and our primary focus was on ensuring that the kids felt loved and supported throughout the transition. They took the news better than we expected, largely because we had been open with them about the changes happening in our family. Avery moved out of our house and into a new place. To my surprise, she decided to move in with Gavin. At first, I felt a surge of anger and betrayal all over again, but over time, I've come to accept it. She seems genuinely happy with him, and that's all I can ask for. It's still strange to think about, but I'm learning to let go of the resentment. As for me, I've been focusing on rebuilding my life. I stayed in our house, which has been a source of stability for the kids. We've created new routines and traditions, and while it's not always easy, we're finding our way. I've reconnected with old friends, taken up new hobbies, and even started dating again. It's a slow process, but I'm learning to enjoy life on my own terms. Work has improved significantly. With the emotional turmoil behind me, I've been able to focus more and even took on some new projects that reignited my passion for my career. My colleagues have noticed the change, and I'm proud of the progress I've made professionally. The kids are doing well too. They've adjusted to the new living arrangements and seem to be thriving. Emma has taken up painting, and Lucas is really into soccer. We spend a lot of quality time together, and I make sure to be there for all their important moments. Therapy has continued to be a big part of my life. I see my therapist regularly, and it's been incredibly helpful in processing my feelings and moving forward. I've also stayed involved in the support group, sharing my experiences and learning from others who've been through similar situations. Looking back, I realized that the journey was painful and difficult, but it also taught me a lot about resilience, forgiveness, and the importance of self-care. I've come to terms with the fact that life doesn't always go as planned, but that doesn't mean it can't be good.